the house next to me.
Right, right. So I looked it up. If you're in a place, if you're in a place that there's an Eruv, then there's no problem, right? If you're in a place that's an Eruv, um, then there won't be any problem. The same way you could carry into the street, you could carry, in that case, you could carry from private to private. But let's say you're in a place that there's no Eruv, place that there is a real public, there's a public property outside. Your house is private. Can you go from one, let's say you have a back to back or side by side, like you said, go from your property to your neighbor's property, you would need to make an eruv, chatzerot. You would have to do something to join your properties, collect food from each one, and put into one of the houses, which we call an eruv chatzerot, to join them together. And when I saw that the issue is if you carry from your house to one domain to another domain, there's a concern you might come to carry from your house to a public domain. But if you go ahead and you do something, make this Erev Chatzerot, that would join you together and be able to carry from your house to your friend's house. So that would, and it's a very interesting thing. So let's say you have a two-family house, and let's say if the street would be a public domain, and you want to go from your, let's say you have your apartment, let's say you have a house, that means that you own, let's say, the bottom floor and he owns the top floor, let's say, if that would be such a situation. Someone sold the bottom floor to Ralph. Ralph has the top floor. If you want to carry from one floor, from one house to the bottom floor to another house, meaning that this is a private place, this is owned by the bottom. It's not that it's all owned by one person and one landlord. See, there is a leniency if you have one landlord and they own and they have something in each apartment. Let's say they're renting the apartments to the individuals and they have a refrigerator in each apartment. The landlord still has something in each apartment that some lenient and say that unites the apartments. But if each person is their own owner or if each person would be their own, to be their own owner, then you would have an issue of going from your private place, carrying something from your private property to your neighbor's private property without making some sort of eruv of joining the properties together. I wanted to get back to you on that. The rabbis are very concerned. They're very concerned that less people make mistakes and go carry. The big concern is carrying from private property to public property. That would be a biblical violation. Therefore, the rabbis made certain enactments to protect that it will never come to be. So because things are confusing. Not everyone, people can make mistakes. If I could carry from my house to a different house, to a different domain, so I might come to carry from my house to a public domain. Even though on a Torah level, there's no problem carrying from my house to your house, from private to private, but there's a concern that people don't do something to recognize that I have this is different by making that by collecting the bread from each one and we put the bread in one house. I mean, it's like this is our house, like we make it into one house. We don't do things like that of that nature, less people make mistakes. So that will be the the thing. I mean, there's also an issue if let's say, if everybody would rent an apartment, if I rent this apartment, you rent that apartment, and the lobbies, right? The lobbies are also shared by everybody. So that also has a resemblance of public domain, and we got to deal with that. Also making Eruv Chatzeris to unite that, unless the landlord has a piece, something in each and every apartment. Okay, we're going to continue in our Gemara on 4a. We are on, not 4, 6a. Vava Manav, good morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good to see you. We left we left off. Um, we're trying to understand where was the precedent that if you go through a property which is a makom patur on a Torah level, a property which is not public or private, you started in a private property, ended off in public, but you went through a non-public property, non-private property in between. So you didn't go directly from private to public. So now the question is, where do we? And the rabbi said you are chayav. The rabbi said you would be chayav, you would be in violation of the Shabbat if you picked up something in your private property, you walked through the bench area, the area that was not a public area, not a public thoroughfare of people walking, and then you subsequently went into the public. Where do you find that you would be chayav in violation for such a thing? So the Gemara said they wanted to prove it from the size of Reshut Rabim. The Gemara said that the size of Reshut Rabim, we find that according to the Rabbanan, that doesn't have the status of public property. And those sides of the public property, since it doesn't have the status of public property in itself, but yet if you went from private through that area which is the side of public property, which is not public property itself, and then you continue walking to public and you placed it down, you'd be in violation of the Shabbat, even though you went through an area which on a Torah level is not considered a public property or private property. So that was the Gemara wanted to say. So we found a similar case to the benches. But the Gemara shoots back, Maskular Papa, Hanicha L'Rabbanan. That's only good according to Rabbanan, the Armi Sidei Rishut Rabim, Lav Rishut Rabim Dami. That the Rabbanan holds that area, that's the side of the public thoroughfare, they hold it doesn't have a status of public property. However, that's not a universal law, because there is an opinion, Elul ben Azai, Elul Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, he holds that the size of Rishut Rabim, we are on 6A1, but on the right side. But according to Rebbe Elazar says that the size of public property have the status of public property, Ma'ikal and Meima. So therefore, we never found you went from private through a non-obligated area, because they hold that the size of public property are exactly like public property. We said yesterday, the size of public property are areas where the public spills over in times of heavy traffic. Like we said, for example, we said part of a wall surrounding a person's yard adjacent to the public property, part of the wall came down, so it collapsed. The public will occasionally, walk into that area of that where the wall was, but in the rabbis hold that since that's not the main walking area, and not regularly we walk on that area, they held that it's not considered public property. But the other rabbi holds no, that's considered public property. It's adjacent to public property. Sometimes the walk will spill over into that area. So according to that, we never found a situation that you went from private through a non-obligatory domain and then into public that you would be in violation of the Shabbat. So how do you know? The Gemara says, so how do you know, where do we find the precedent that according to that opinion, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, that says that the size of public property are like public property? So we haven't found a case that you go through this type of area which is not public, and then you end up in public, that you'll be of chayav, obligated. So the Gemara says, I found a case. Why? Because you know when Rabbi Elazar says that the sides of public property have the status of the public property itself, when sometimes when the street is very heavy traffic, and it'll flow over into that space where that wall used to be, where the wall now is half the wall is gone, people will walk on that area. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that's heicha deleke chifufei, when there's no obstructions along the public domain that would stop the traffic from going there. But if there would be an obstruction, But let's say, when there is obstructions, then mishametle. Rebbe Lezer will not say that that area adjacent to the public thoroughfare, if there's certain obstructions that would prevent them from going to that open space. For example, Rashi says, what's the case? Rashi says, let's say in front of a wall, sometimes people would place certain pegs, certain sticks, certain poles in front of a wall that the wagons, let's say, you have a wagon load. You don't want the wagon to hit the wall itself, right? So what do you do in order to prevent, what do you call them? Bumpers, right? Or certain type of things that you place in front of the wall so the wagon will hit the weight of the wagon when it backs up or when it's moving it will hit the bumpers, the sticks, and not the actual wall itself. Because if it will hit the wall itself, eventually it'll knock down the wall. So Rabbi Eliezer, who says that when you have a side of the public property, side of the public thoroughfare has a status of public thoroughfare, that's only talking perhaps when there's no real stuff that are in front of the sides of the public thoroughfare. But if there is this obstructions that are um, on over there by that area, he would not say that's called that's called a public area, because those obstructions, like if you have those pegs or those things, they will prevent you from going ahead and easily walking to that area. So there being that's the case, nevertheless, when it came to the case in the desert, the Jewish people, when they went, when they built their tents, and they had their tents in their homes, their tents, and which opened up into the public property, they also had these things in front of their tents, so to speak, in front of their private property. There was these areas, there was a little spacing between their private property and the public domain. So they also had some buffer zone between their public domain, the sides of the public domain. They didn't open their tent flush up to the public domain. So that area that was right outside their tent we'll call it the sides of public property, which were not easily user friendly for the public to walk. And yet, if you went from your tent to the public area, you're a violation of the Shabbat. If you carried from your tent to the public area where they were bringing the donations to Moshe. So we see that even though they went from private through an area which is not called public or private on a Torah level, that area right in front of their tent, nevertheless, they were a violation of the Shabbat.
But
So,
if they didn't get to the public and they just went into that in between area,
and put it
then
down, they would be
and put it
exempt
down, it's no problem.
on a Torah level, Mark. Right, on a Torah level, it's no problem.
Yeah,
Right.
but in other words, even the Rabbanan, if they go out of the tent and they are in this area that's still not where people walk, it's not public area. So they're chayav of carrying if they're in this, like
So,
they
so,
can't get anything out of their tent if that's the case
so
at
let's say
all.
I'm saying, so they have this little, let's say, called little empty space in front of their house where they might have put some pegs or something, a foot out, a foot,
Yeah, yeah.
let's
So
say
that foot out.
that foot space from their tent to that foot out, that area is not, let's say, it's not public on a Torah level, it's not
Right.
private. So on a rabbinic level, they'll call it a carmelit. Most probably, they'll say you can't carry on a rabbinic level from your tent to that area unless you'll carry from a private to a real public area without any buffer zone. But
Right.
rabbinically, but on a Torah level, that's not a place that the public will spill over to in any real serious fashion because of its obstruction that's there, and therefore
What's
It's
going on, man?
not
Good morning.
considered a area which is a public area or on a Torah level at all. So therefore, the Gemara says Hilkach lahadamya. So therefore, we have a good comparison. The Gemara says. So we found the case of the benches going from that private house to the public through the benches, which we said is not public area on a Torah level, is very comparable to going from your tent to the public area through this area that had this buffer zone and which had these pegs or sticks in front of the tent, and therefore, and yet you were chayav, your violation of Shabbat. So that's why the Rabbanan say that you'll be in the violation of the Shabbat if you go through from your house to public property through this area, through the bench area. Okay, good morning, Asaf. Now, so the Gemara says, I mean, like I said, in the Tosas HaRosh says, in the time of the Gemara, they would place these pegs along the side of the public property in order to prevent the wagons. Good morning, Malcolm. Okay, we gotta do some recruitment, Mark. In the times of the Gemara, they would place the pegs along the length of the public property to prevent the wagons that are passing from hitting the walls and damage them. So it's logical that that's what they did also in the time of the Mishkan, that they separated their tents from the public property through these pegs. Okay, so therefore, that's why the Gemara find a good comparison. So now the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, now on the bottom of 6A1, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Umode ben Azai. Ben Azai will concede, will agree, that even though Ben Azai says that if you go from your house to public property through these bench area, that you're exempt. But remember, what was the reason why we said that Ben Azai holds that you're exempt? The Gemara said because he holds mahalech ka'omei, that every time when you take a step and you put down your foot, he looks at it like you stopped. Every step is like you stopped. So if you would jump for amod, that would be that you didn't stop in the middle, right? But if you're running, so running is a good point. But it could be even when you run, every step. He might. It's a good question. He doesn't say rot kamai. Says mahalech. Says when you walk, when you're going. Good question about running would be a good question. But regarding walking, he says he looks at walking as if you stop every step. However, the Gemara says, so what about if you throw something, right? The Gemara doesn't say the case of running. So why did the Gemara use the case of running? Meaning to say, Mark, it could be if we want to infer, if it is true that he would hold that running is different than walking, then the Gemara should say that Ben Azai would agree that if you run, that means you did not, there's no stop, and therefore you would be chayav if you run from private to public. And yet he doesn't say that. The Gemara says that's the case that Ben Azai would admit if you throw something, right? You throw something from private to public, so there's nothing there. There's no stoppage in between. So since there's no stoppage in between, so let's clarify something. If you go from private to public, Ben Azai would agree that if you went from private to public, and the second you took the step from private to public, so you stop. It's finished. You violated. But where did Ben Azai say you'd be exempt if you went through this bench area? So therefore, when you went from private to public, there was no. You already had your private action was already gone before you reached the public area. Was every step. By the time you reached the bench area, that's when your first akira, your uprooting was finished because it already was placed down. That step that you took, the last step out of your private area to the first step into the bench area, that step was upright. So therefore now there's no more akira, there's no more uprooting. So now you're going, now it's as if you stopped in the non-obligatory place, and now you're walking from that area to the public property. There's no obligation because there's no uprooting. Because you're going from the bench to public. You're going from a non-private area to the public area. So you can't be chayav. But if you go ahead and you throw something from your private area through the bench area into the public area, so now it's the akira, the uprooting, what went from the private, it went through but the fact, and it landed in public, he would agree that you're a violation. But I'm suggesting, Mark, that the fact that the Gemara did not give the other case, that you were running, wouldn't running be a bigger chidush than throwing? I mean, throwing, it never stop. But if you call walking every step a stop, you can make it. Maybe we could discuss running also every step a stop. And the Gemara, and if you want to tell me he would admit that running would be different than walking, and running would not be considered stopping, the Gemara should tell us, and Ben Azai admits, but when you're running, it's different than walking. The fact that it does not give us that case, it gives us the more extreme case, which is so not similar in any fashion to walking, would seemingly indicate if you're similar to walking by running, would also be like walking, and will not be chayav. That's what I want to suggest. That's my suggestion. To your question, based on your question, so when you ask a question, you force the rabbi to come up with some to address your question. And I think to answer your question, I think we have seems like it's a logical proof from the fact that Gemara does not give you a case. But the general rule is, if your case is true, the Gemara would say the bigger chidush, that's the novelty. That even though it's so similar to walking, both is a step on the ground, but yet this step on the ground is considered stop. This step on the ground, you're still going. You hear what I'm saying, Mark? Yeah. So that's okay, all right. But you say an Olympic, right? Okay. But on the other hand, the foot's on the ground. You see, the way I saw how they wanted to explain it, what's the idea of when you're walking? They say in a person, the process of walking who takes 10 steps is considered to have started and stopped 10 times. Each time he places his foot upon the ground, he's considered to have placed his body down. And each time he lifts his foot, to have lifted his body. Right. But on the ground. When you're running. Okay, so but you weren't, but you didn't go 4 amot in the air. No. So he says it's true that but it's true when you're running, it might be a certain amount in the air. But as long as you're not 4 amot, if you would be 4 amot in the air, then you would be right. I ran 4 amot, I never put my foot down. But if I'm running when every couple of feet, put my foot down, it's the morning. So therefore that might be considered like walking. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. That's what we just said. Mode ben Azai v'zorek. And Ben Azai would admit that when you're throwing something, that's a different story. Now, what the chidush is, like we said before. You see, when Ben Azai says you are a patur, when you go through this bench area, there's 2 ways he didn't explain why you're patur. We explained because every step is like you stop. What do you say? And therefore you have because every step is like you stop, so you never uprooted from private to public. You only uprooted from the bench area. But at the time when you reach the public area, I'm saying when you get to the bench, you went from private, you uprooted in private, and the step you took from private to the bench area was an uprooting from private to a place where you're not obligated. because, and then when you went from the private, now when you entered the public, sorry, when you went from the bench area to the public, you went from an area which is not a private area to a public area. So no moving from a private to public took place. Correct? That's what didn't take place. There was only an uprooting from private to bench, and then bench to public. And an uprooting from private, got it? An uprooting from private to bench, you're not chayav, because that's private to non-public on a Torah level. And an uprooting from bench to public is not chayav, because again, it's not uprooting, it's not a private area. So therefore, that's why you're not chayav when you're walking through. But that's all. But he didn't explain his reasoning. If maybe you could have said his reasoning is because you went through a non-obligatory domain when you walked. But the Gemara knocked that out. The Gemara says even if you go through a non-obligatory domain, you would be obligated. So therefore, based on that, if you would throw something from this private area through the bench to the public, you would be in violation. Because there was no stopping. There was no, the original, it came out, he uprooted in private when he took the item, picked up the item, and he threw it all the way and it rested in what? In a public area. That's what the Gemara says. We learned in the Braita like this. Hamotzi mechanut leplatya. If you went ahead and you took from the store to the public area, derech sedav, through the bench area, chayav, you would be chayav. Echad hamotzi, whether you brought it out from the public, from the private, through the bench area to the public area. Echad hamachnis, whether you brought it in from the public area through the bench area to the private area. Echad hazorek, whether you threw something from this area, from the private, through the bench area to the public, or vice versa. The echad hamoshit, or whether you handed something. You took something, a long pole, and then you handed it from public to the guy in the private area, and it went through this this bench area. It would be chayav in all cases. However, Ben Azai Omer, Ben Azai says, right, here comes the support right now. Hamotzi v'hamachnis patur. Ben Azai disagrees with the Tanakama. He says, if you carry something from this private area through the bench area to the public area, or vice versa, from public to the bench to the private, patur, you're exempt. Like we said before, because every step is like you stop. However, hamushit, hazorek, if you hand something from the private to the public through this bench area, or this is the case we're looking for, hazorek, you threw something from private to public through the bench area, chayav. He admits that what? You would be chayav. Okay, so the Gemara proved its point. Okay, now we're starting a new piece of morning. Starting a new piece of Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. Dalid Rishiyot Shabbat. There are 4 domains regarding Shabbat. 4 different domains meaning on a Torah level and on a rabbinic level. Meaning on a Torah level, there's really 3 domains. There's something called private property, according to the Torah. There's something called public property, according to the Torah. And there's something called non-public, doesn't have a status of public or private. And that's called, if it's not, doesn't really fulfill the qualifications of public or the qualifications of private, it's considered a mokom petur, an exempt area on a Torah level. However, defined by if it's not, let's say we said according to Rashi, if you don't have 600,000 people to the forest, we'll say will not be a public property, right? Forest will not be a midbar. So what we say exactly Mark said, a desert. How we go walking in the desert? It's not a public area. So if technically if a person would be carrying in the desert, you wouldn't be violating the Torah if you carry from the desert and you walk one step from the desert, you pick up something in the desert, and then you stop in the public property. Since you uprooted in the desert, you on a Torah level, no violation. On a rabbinic level, the rabbis say, hey, you're going to carry in the forest, go from the forest to public property. You can actually go from a real private property to public property because you're not going to, people, you have to, the rabbis are here to protect. Right? People make mistakes. If I could carry from the forest to public property, I'll carry in public property itself. Right? So the rabbis, that became something called the Carmelite. That Carmelite is a different, is a area which is not a public property on the Torah level in the morning and not a private property on the Torah level, but is a rabbinic, a place where rabbinically you can't carry in a Carmelite. We treat it interesting. It's a place you can't carry 4 amot in the Carmelite. You can't carry 4 amot. You can't carry from public property into this Carmelite. You can't carry from private into the Carmelite. Can't carry from the Carmelite into private or Carmelite or so on, vice versa. So that's the Carmelite. For instance, let's say a street that you're able to make an Eruv, but you didn't make an Eruv. Okay? Let's talk about Deal, New Jersey, right? So let's say a place like Deal where it's not, I don't think it's too controversial, at least today. It's not too controversial today morning, or maybe even back then on a Torah, meaning the issue maybe was, should you make an Eruv or you shouldn't make an Eruv? But let's say in a place that you have an ability to make an Eruv, but you didn't make the Eruv, right? A street that you have the ability. There are certain streets, certain places that you can't make an Eruv. But let's say a place you could make an Eruv, but you didn't. Let's say a small town USA. So it's that small town USA, rabbinically, you can't carry 4 amot in that public street, the main street in Woodburn, New York. You can't carry 4 amot in Woodburn. You can't carry from your house to the street of Woodburn. You can't carry from the street of Woodburn into your house. We're going to treat it. We give it certain laws as to protect us, not to make mistakes. So, but then there's certain areas that are called a Mokum Patur, which is actually, even rabbinically, it's not a problem to put something from public property into this Mokum Patur. It's different than a Carmelist. It doesn't have, how is it different than a Carmelist? So let's say a Mokum Patur is something that has, let's say it has a certain height. Let's say it has, something that's, about, it has to be at least 3 tvach, anything, it has to be at least 3 tvachim above the ground, about 11 inches above the ground, because if it's anything that's lower than 11 inches, it's like it's part of the ground itself. And if it's part of, so let's say in public property, let's say you would have something that's 11 inches high, and it's not, but it's very thin. It's like a little pole. So it's like, it sounds like a pole, a fire hydrant, and it's not 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. Very good. It's not 15 inches by 15 inches. So it's 11 inches high, 12 inches high, but not 15 inches by 15 inches. So technically, it would seem I could pick up something in the street on Shabbat. If I'm standing right next to a fire hydrant, I'm not giving practical halacha, but the way it sounds, if I could pick up something and I want to put this item that I picked up in public property, and I'm standing right next, I can't walk 4 amot, but I could technically, on a Torah level, I could walk 3 amot, right? So on rabbinic level, it seems that the Chafetz Chaim, let's look at the Chafetz Chaim. He says, it sounds like you have a one time that you could go up to 4 amot. But meaning you can't, right? But I can't go, say, you know what, I'm going to walk 3 amot, stop. Walk 3 amot, stop. That I can't, that I shouldn't do, rabbinically. On a Torah level, I could walk in public property. I'm not going from private to public. In private to public, one step from private into public is Torah violation, right? But now I'm in public. So what I saw from the Chafetz Chaim, to double check it, it says like this: if you're in public property, you have one shot of walking within 4 amot. I could walk a step, and then I stop. But I can't walk 4 steps. I mean, I can't walk 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet. But I can't say that once I'm going to walk I take a few steps. I take 3 less than 4 amot, then I walk another less than 4 amot. That I can't do. There might be certain circumstances, special dire circumstances, that you might be allowed to do that. We'll see. We'll learn about that. But on the general basis, you can't go ahead and take a step. I'm going to carry this home. I'm going to carry it home. I'll go like this. I went more than 4 up, right? So I can't do that. Mark, you got it? So that would be the situation, like Sonny said, that if I would be standing next to a fire hydrant, I'd pick up something from the floor and I want to put it on the fire hydrant. So technically that should be allowed, even rabbinically, if we'll consider the fire hydrant a mokum patur, a place that's exempt place, and it's not a carmelit. They didn't give it a status of a carmelit. If this was a raised mound or something in public property, something like this, right? Let's say this thing, this is not 10. Let's say it's not 35 inches tall. Let's say if it's not 35, if it's not 10 tvachim high, it is more than 11 inches high, and it's 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So this should be already a carmelit. This should already be rabbinically forbidden domain area. No, but then I can't go a rabbinically forbidden. I can't go from public onto it.
What separates makom?
So because the fact that its surface area, it's less than 4 tvachim by 4, the width, like you said.
So
You give,
between
3, right? Because if it's 10 tvachim high, if this would be 10 tvachim high, if this would be in public property, this would be a private area already. This might have a status. This thing itself. Again, I'm saying if it's 10 tvachim high, it would be a carmelit if it's less than 10 tvachim lower. Exactly. If it's less than 35, 40 inches, it's a carmelit. If it's higher than it, then it already might be a private. You might look at it as a private area. Because if it's for sure, if it's mine, if I put this, that would definitely make. So maybe good question. So it might be considered the government's private area. I mean, it might be considered the government's private. The government owns a building. You go into a building.
Private, it's public, it's a park.
But okay.
And so that general grand around it, right? If you have a building, like a bathroom building.
It's private. It's private. That's private.
It's the same ownership as the park itself, but since it's in a building, it's a makom.
Right.
So it's like a park place. So it's considered a different domain. It's considered private, not by ownership, but just by its status. You know.
Right. That's what it would seem like. And also that we're going to see more about, how do you there's something called the imaginary wall, halachic walls, that you look at these as if this goes up, and therefore it's as if it's its own enclosure. Yeah, right.
So the fire hydrant would be considered which?
More patur. Because if it doesn't have the width of 15 inch of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, doesn't have it's not 4,
Okay.
therefore, but has the height. It's more than 3 tvachim high.
So makom and carmelit are both between 3 and 10 tvachim high. Once you go above
Right.
you're already in Rishut Yachid area.
Right.
So between 3 and 10 tvachim high, and the only difference is makom patur would be less
Less
than
than 4
by 4
Right.
tvachim,
Right.
and a carmelit would be more than 4 by 4
Exactly.
tvachim.
That would be exactly.
And then you said the forest or the desert area that you gave before.
That's
that
a
would be
carmelist.
considered
Those are all
carmelit.
carmelists, right? The forest, the ocean, the desert, that's all carmelit area also, because that's not considered a public area on a Torah level, but it's also not considered a private area. Okay, I want anyone to be late to davening for slichot. Everyone should have an easy fast. Time flies when you're having fun, everybody. And thank you for joining, everybody. Okay, maybe you'll start your class. You could get it started, guys. The Gemara is open if you want.